Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving headfirst into a mountain of info today, digging out those absolute golden nuggets of knowledge just for you. I've always been fascinated by why it's so easy for us, for me anyway, to take credit when things go well, but then point the finger when they don't. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on this truly universal and frankly often frustrating human tendency. We're going to unravel the deep science behind this human puzzle, using insights from a cutting-edge AI-driven study. It pulls from psychology, neuroscience, genetics, even philosophy, our mission, to help you understand why this behavior is so incredibly common, its far-reaching consequences in our lives and the world, and maybe most importantly, how we can all cultivate a bit more accountability. Let's unpack this. So where do we even begin with something this big? I guess the heart of it is something called the self-serving bias, or SSB. Think about it. You nail a big presentation at work, right? What's your immediate thought? Nailed it. I'm so prepared. I'm brilliant at this. You attribute that win to your own skills, your effort, internal stuff. But then maybe a project goes sideways and suddenly it's, well, the team didn't give me the right info, or that deadline was just impossible. It's like a cognitive distortion, a mental shortcut, basically, where we link good outcomes to ourselves and bad outcomes to, well, anything else, external factors. Its main job seems to be pumping up our self-esteem and making us look good. Is that fair?
That's a perfect way to put it, yeah. And what you're describing, this self-serving bias, it fits right into a much broader idea in psychology called attribution theory. This theory basically helps us understand how we explain why things happen, the causes we assign to events, especially, successes and failures. And the really crucial insight here, I think, is that how we explain an event, particularly a setback, fundamentally dictates whether we learn and grow from it or if we just get stuck, blaming the world. For instance, if you attribute a failure to a lack of effort on your part, okay, that's internal, it's changeable, you can control it, that actually sets you up for growth. It suggests, okay, you can tweak something, do better next time. But if you just chalk it up to pure bad luck, that's external, uncontrollable. There's no clear path forward because, well, it wasn't your fault to begin with, right? So why change?
Ah, okay. So like two sides of the same coin then.
Yeah.
You've got credit claiming on one side and blame dodging on the other. Both are these kind of manifestations of how we explain things internally. And both are really serving that core human drive to protect ourselves, enhance our sense of self.
Exactly. We instinctively reach for that gold star. And yeah, we definitely want to avoid any black marks against our name, so to speak. And something truly remarkable here, I think, is how this self-serving bias can lead to what some researchers call a moral illusion.
A moral illusion. What does that mean?
Well, it isn't usually about someone consciously trying to deceive others, though that can happen. It's often an unconscious process. We rationalize decisions that benefit us as being objectively good, or even morally sound. Because the bias is so tied up with keeping our self-esteem high, when an action works out for us, our brain almost automatically frames it as right, even if, an outside observer might see it as ethically a bit iffy.
Wow.
And this distortion really gums up the works for accountability. It's a big problem.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you don't even perceive your mistakes as mistakes because your bias has reframed them, how can you possibly learn from them?
Right. You can't fix what you don't think is broken.
Exactly. So this prevents individuals, and by extension, whole teams or organizations from growing. And of course, for anyone on the receiving end of constant blame deflection, it can be incredibly frustrating. It really strains relationships.
Okay, so this impulse, claiming credit, dodging blame, it's not just, me or that one coworker everyone avoids. It's absolutely everywhere. The study really emphasizes how deeply ingrained it is in us, like a product of our evolutionary wiring. For self-enhancement, optimism.
That's right.
They even called it a despair inhibition module, which I found fascinating. Helps us keep a positive outlook, push through tough times.
Yeah, and you can see how in ancient ancestral environments, this bias probably offered real survival advantages.
Like what?
Well, perhaps boosting confidence when facing a rival, or maybe helping someone bounce back quicker after a setback, ready for the next challenge.
Makes sense.
Absolutely. Its universal presence is clear across cultures, genders, age groups. It seems to be a fundamental part of the human package. But, and this is key, the way it shows up can vary quite a bit.
Ah, so it's not monolithic.
Not at all. What's particularly striking is that while the underlying drive for self-enhancement seems pretty innate, the specific behaviors, how we claim credit, how we dodge blame those, seem to be shaped significantly by what we learn from our culture.
Okay, tell me more about that cultural difference.
Well, generally speaking, we see the self-serving bias being stronger in Western individualistic cultures. Think the US, Canada, Australia, places like that, because these societies really emphasize personal achievement, autonomy. Individuals are often more inclined to directly claim credit for successes and conversely externalize blame for failures. It fits the cultural narrative.
And the contrast.
The contrast is often seen in more collectivistic cultures, especially, say, in East Asia. Research there sometimes shows a less pronounced tendency for this kind of overt self-enhancement. You might even find more self-critical tendencies, especially regarding personal failures.
Why is that?
It's often attributed to a stronger cultural emphasis on group harmony, on maintaining face, not just for oneself, but for the group. Individuals might externalize blame for a group failure to protect the collective, but maybe take personal responsibility, even excessively sometimes, for a personal slip-up to reinforce group bonds.
Huh. So the core drive is there, but the expression, the behavior, it changes based on what the society values.
Precisely.
Okay.
And yeah, the research also points to some minor differences, like some studies suggest men might blame partners more in relationship conflicts, or that older adults sometimes show a bit less self-serving bias for negative outcomes, maybe through wisdom or experience. But it's definitely a spectrum.
Fascinating. Okay, so it's deeply psychological, maybe evolutionary roots, shaped by culture. But you mentioned neuroscience earlier. Our brains are actually complicit in this.
Oh, absolutely. It's truly remarkable how our brains seem wired for this. When we take personal credit for something good happening, our brain's reward system literally lights up.
Lights up. Like how?
Think of areas like the dorsal striatum and the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. These are key parts of our internal reward circuit. Taking credit gives us a little hit of dopamine, that feel-good chemical.
Ah, dopamine.
Yeah. So it's like our brain is giving us an internal high five. This neural reward makes these self-serving attributions incredibly robust and honestly quite challenging to change. It literally feels good to pat yourself on the back.
So it's not just a conscious choice, like deciding I'm going to take credit. Our brain is actually rewarding us for it. That explains a lot.
Precisely. And, you know, on the flip side, when we manage to deflect blame, that same kind of neural activation seems to help soften the blow. It might mitigate the unpleasant feelings of personal failure or guilt. It's like a form of neural relief.
Wow.
Our prefrontal cortex, the PFC, which is involved in higher-level thinking and decision-making, also plays a role here. It's likely involved in weighing these immediate psychological benefits, feeling good, protecting ego against any potential long-term social costs.
So these behaviors aren't just bad habits we picked up. They're rooted in our biology.
Deeply ingrained biological drivers, yes, which makes them sticky.
And if that wasn't enough layers, this deep dive also brought in genetic and evolutionary perspectives. I was struck by the link to personality traits like narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
That has a significant genetic component, right? Something like 33% to 59% heritability. And it strongly predisposes people to exaggerated credit claiming and blame dodging.
That's correct. The genetic influence on personality traits that amplify these biases is quite significant.
And there was even a mention of a specific gene, HTR2B, linked to anger and blame.
Yes, some preliminary research hints at potential genetic links for specific behaviors associated with blame, like anger and impulsivity. It's complex, but the biological underpinnings are definitely there.
Which leads to this paradox you mentioned.
Exactly. The striking insight here is this compelling paradox from an evolutionary standpoint. While these self-serving biases, maybe even a degree of self-deception, might have started out as genuinely adaptive mechanisms.
Helping us survive back then.
Perhaps, yes, boosting confidence, maybe helping us navigate social hierarchies, making us appear more competent to rivals or potential mates. But, and this is the crucial part, they can be profoundly detrimental in complex modern societies.
How so? Give me an example.
Okay, zoom out. Consider a political leader who consistently blames external factors, other countries, previous administrations, bad luck for policy failures. Now, that might shield their personal image in the short term, maybe keep their approval rating stable for a bit.
Sure, politically savvy, maybe.
Right. But it completely prevents systemic learning. If the problems are always out there, why change the system in here? It stops effective governance dead in its tracks, and ultimately, it harms the entire populace.
So what was once maybe an individual survival hack can now become a major societal liability.
Precisely. A huge liability.
That's a really powerful point. And it leads us right into this philosophical dimension. Because when we talk about claiming credit and dodging blame, we're bumping up against big concepts like moral responsibility, blameworthiness, accountability. Blameworthiness specifically. This study mentioned it usually implies a few things. The action was voluntary, the person knew the consequences, and the action itself was inherently morally wrong.
Right. And this immediately raises a fundamental question, doesn't it? If our actions are so heavily influenced by these deep-seated biases, our neurobiology, maybe even our genes, how much genuine free will do we truly have in these moments?
The age-old free will versus determinism debate.
Exactly. It's central here. Some philosophers, the incompatibilists, argue that true moral blameworthiness requires genuine free will, the actual ability to have chosen differently in that exact moment, unconstrained by prior causes. Others, called compatibilists, argue that, well, we can still be held meaningfully responsible even if our actions are influenced or even determined by prior causes and our internal makeup. They focus more on whether the actions stemmed from our character or values, even if those were shaped over time.
So there's real skepticism about whether we're ever truly deserving of blame or praise in some ultimate cosmic sense.
There is, yes. If so much of our behavior is driven by forces beyond our conscious control, how fair is ultimate praise or blame? It's a deep philosophical thicket.
And this isn't just a modern head-scratcher, right? You mentioned natural law theory.
Right, the idea that there are universal moral principles discoverable through reason. This perspective suggests that our very human desire to grab credit and avoid blame can often directly clash with these principles, especially when those behaviors involve twisting the truth or lead to clearly unfair outcomes for others.
So we end up with this fundamental ethical dilemma.
I think so, yes. How can societies justly hold individuals morally responsible for actions that are, at least in part, a product of their inherent biological and psychological wiring, rather than solely unconstrained free choice?
That's a tough one.
It really is. And it strongly suggests that our societal responses need to evolve, maybe move beyond purely punitive measures sometimes.
Towards what?
Towards fostering deeper understanding, cultivating empathy, and developing strategies that genuinely encourage behavioral change, rather than just reinforcing defensive blame avoidance through fear or punishment. It's about creating systems that encourage growth, not just retribution.
Okay, let's bring this down to earth. How does this actually play out in our everyday lives? Let's talk real-world impacts, starting at the individual and interpersonal level.
Right.
Someone who constantly blame shifts.
Yeah.
What does that do to them? The study mentioned a distorted self-perception.
Yes, they can end up genuinely believing their own skewed narrative. This can lead to overconfidence, poor decision-making because they're not learning from failures, and ultimately, it really hinders their own personal growth.
And for the victim, the person always being blamed.
Oh, the impact can be devastating. Emotional exhaustion, definitely. Deep self-doubt, maybe I am the problem. Insecurity. And it can seriously contribute to mental health challenges like anxiety and depression over time.
And in relationships, just toxic, I imagine.
Absolutely corrosive. It just chips away at trust piece by piece. Every misunderstanding gets magnified because there's no shared reality about who's responsible for what.
And you mentioned the extreme cases, like narcissistic family dynamics.
Yeah.
That sounded particularly damaging.
It is. Blame shifting is often a central tool for control in those situations. The abuser denies their behavior, blames the victim for provoking them, or claims the victim is too sensitive.
And the enabler parent.
Crucially, an enabler parent might actually collude with this narrative, maybe to keep the peace or because they're manipulated themselves. They reinforce this twisted reality for the child.
Which leads the child to internalize it.
Tragically, yes. They might come to believe they are inherently flawed or deserving of the mistreatment. This sets up a heartbreaking cycle of intergenerational dysfunction and trauma, and critically, it prevents these children from developing healthy self-soothing skills because their reality is constantly being denied.
That's incredibly sad. Okay, let's zoom out again.
Yeah.
What about societal and institutional contexts? Politicians were mentioned.
Oh yes. Public office holders are often masters of blame avoidance. It's practically a required skill sometimes. They use sophisticated tactics. There are agency strategies. It wasn't my department, it was theirs. Policy strategy is designing policies specifically to minimize future blame, even if they aren't the most effective. Presentational strategies, just spinning the narrative, framing things favorably. And reactive or anticipatory blame avoidance, deflecting blame after the fact, or setting things up beforehand so they can't be blamed.
A whole playbook.
A whole playbook. And they're equally quick, usually, to claim credit for any success, even if their actual influence was pretty minimal.
We see examples all the time, right?
Yeah.
The study mentioned Greg Abbott blaming young people during COVID, or Erdogan blaming force majeure for earthquakes.
Exactly. Or even going way back, ancient Chinese courts blaming falls of dynasties on inner figures like palace women to deflect from their own failures. It's timeless.
What about the workplace?
A pervasive blame culture in a workplace is absolutely toxic. It crushes innovation because people are afraid to take risks. It hinders problem solving because no one wants to admit mistakes. And it destroys trust.
So, employees blaming coworkers, managers blaming the economy.
All the time. And remember the Theranos scandal. Elizabeth Holmes famously tried to blame her fraudulent actions partly on a relationship she'd been in. It's a high-profile example of dodging personal accountability.
And it pops up everywhere else too, right? Education, sports.
Absolutely. Education. Students blaming unfair exams instead of perhaps their study habits. Sports. Athletes hogging credit for wins but pointing fingers at teammates, or bad refs for losses. Even public health. Officials sometimes overemphasize individual lifestyle choices for complex chronic diseases, which can inadvertently let systemic factors like poverty or lack of access to healthy food off the hook.
And environmental issues. That seems like a huge area for blame games. Massive. Blame attribution, or the lack of clear accountability, is a major driver of inaction. You see, greenwashing, where companies talk a big game but don't change fundamental practices. Or the focus gets shifted entirely onto individual actions, like recycling, which are important but can distract from the much larger scale of corporate and governmental responsibility.
Even just everyday stuff.
Sure. Community interactions scapegoating certain groups for social problems, like victim blaming, or think about customer service. How often do you hear, sorry, that's just company policy, as a way to deflect responsibility for a frustrating situation?
Wow. Okay, when you lay it all out like that, these aren't just isolated incidents.
I know.
They reflect and reinforce these bigger systemic issues. This blame culture really cripples our ability to act together, solve problems, build trust.
It's a perfect example of a collective action dilemma. What feels like rational self-preservation for the individual dodging blame leads to collective stagnation and dysfunction when everyone does it. So the big question then, what's the antidote? How do we break free from this, or at least manage it better? Let's shift to strategies, starting with us as individuals.
Okay.
The study emphasized self-awareness and objective self-evaluation. That sounds simple, but probably isn't easy.
It's foundational, but yes, requires real effort. Honest introspection, genuinely questioning our own assumptions about why something happened, taking ownership even when it's uncomfortable.
And learning from mistakes.
Yeah.
Embracing criticism.
Crucial. Reframing errors not as, proof of inadequacy, but as invaluable data points for growth. Actively seeking feedback and really listening to it, not just defending, is paramount.
What about empathy and perspective taking? How does that help?
It can dramatically improve our attribution accuracy. When you genuinely try to see a situation from someone else's shoes, understand their pressures, their context, you're less likely to jump to harsh internal judgments about their behavior. It counters that knee-jerk blame reaction.
And finally, self-soothing skills. Why is that important?
Because so much blame shifting stems from trying to avoid uncomfortable feelings, shame, anger, inadequacy. If we can learn healthier ways to manage those intense emotions, to regulate ourselves when things go wrong, we're less likely to resort to defensively pointing fingers.
So it's about building emotional resilience.
Exactly. It breaks the link between feeling bad and needing someone else to blame for it. And this really reframes the whole individual journey. It's a fundamental shift away from just defensive self-preservation, protecting the ego at all costs, towards truly adaptive self-improvement. Meaning, while the self-serving bias offers that initial psychological shield, genuine lasting self-worth doesn't come from pretending you're perfect. It comes from the courage to acknowledge shortcomings and the competency built by addressing them. When you truly internalize that learning from mistakes is growth, that taking responsibility makes you more capable, not less, that unlocks a much deeper, more robust source of confidence.
So it's moving from I'm okay because it wasn't my fault to I'm okay because I can handle mistakes and learn from them.
Beautifully put, yes. It's a much stronger foundation.
Okay, that's the individual piece.
Hmm.
But we know it's systemic too. What about changes within communities and institutions?
Huge potential here. First, just basic stuff. Establishing clear expectations and roles. Ambiguity is where the blame game thrives. If no one knows who's responsible, it's easy to point fingers.
Makes sense? Clarity helps.
Then, actively fostering open, respectful communication and effective conflict resolution, creating what some call a culture of candor, where people feel safe enough to raise problems or admit errors without immediate fear of punishment.
You mentioned something called a no blame or just culture earlier.
Like in aviation. Yes, exactly. Places like aviation, high reliability healthcare settings. They realized that punishing every individual error just drove mistakes underground. A just culture distinguishes between honest mistakes, risky behavior, and reckless disregard. It focuses investigation not on who is to blame, but on what went wrong in the system that allowed this error to occur and how can we learn from it to prevent recurrence.
So it encourages reporting and learning.
Precisely. Without fear of unfair retribution for genuine mistakes. It's a huge shift. And critically, ethical leadership is absolutely essential to make this work.
Leaders have to walk the walk.
Absolutely. They must model responsible behavior, own their own mistakes publicly, create that supportive environment where errors are treated as learning opportunities. Their behavior sets the tone for the entire organization or community.
And for those really big problems, like climate change.
We need to actively promote collective responsibility, acknowledge that accountability extends far beyond just individual consumers or single companies. Governments, industries, international bodies, they all have roles and responsibilities that need to be clearly defined and upheld.
So moving from finger pointing to shared problem solving.
That's the goal. This transition from a blame-focused culture to an accountability-driven one, it's a fundamental paradigm shift. It's essential for any real collective progress. Traditional blame cultures, they lead to fear, cover-up, stagnation. They kill innovation. It's a race to the bottom, a just culture, or an accountability-focused one. It cultivates learning, transparency, trust. It enables far more effective problem-solving, especially for those really complex, wicked problems that have no single person to blame.
And looking even further ahead, what about raising the next generation? This study mentioned cultivating a healthy, educated, and good child.
The crucial piece, absolutely. It starts with parental modeling. Kids watch everything, how parents handle their own commitments, own their mistakes, resolve conflicts. That's incredibly powerful teaching.
So do as I say and as I do.
Exactly. And assigning age-appropriate responsibilities, letting them experience natural consequences sometimes within safe boundaries.
We also need to teach problem-solving skills, right?
Yeah.
Foster independence.
Yes. Encourage them to try and figure things out themselves first, rather than always jumping in to fix it or blame someone else for their difficulties. Build that sense of agency.
And finally, ethical education and moral reasoning from early on.
Definitely. Not just rules, but discussing why. Talking about things like financial responsibility, community involvement, working through moral dilemmas together. This helps build that strong internal moral compass, that sense of social responsibility that underpins true accountability.
So wrapping this all up, this deep dive has really illuminated this, well, deeply ingrained human thing. It's multifaceted: psychology, neurobiology, evolution, culture, all playing a part. It offers those quick, short-term psychological wins, that little ego boost.
Right. Feels good in the moment.
But it extracts these heavy, heavy systemic costs, eroding trust, stifling innovation, just generally impeding our collective progress.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And also truly challenging, grappling with this core ethical dilemma. How do we reconcile these inherent human biases, often unconscious, even merely rewarded, with the moral imperative, the practical necessity for accountability?
Yeah.
Because the ultimate victim of pervasive blame shifting isn't just the person who gets unfairly blamed, it's our collective capacity for learning, for adapting, for effectively solving problems together. That's the real loss.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to chew on. You mentioned AI earlier. What if AI, trained to perhaps neutrally identify these self-serving patterns, could give us objective feedback? Help individuals, maybe even organizations, develop more accurate self-assessments. Could that foster accountability?
An interesting possibility, using technology to help overcome a cognitive bias.
And maybe, just maybe, what if we dared to really reevaluate our societal and institutional reward systems? Move beyond just celebrating the wins and punishing the losses. What if we could design systems that truly incentivize genuine accountability, reward learning from mistakes, and foster collaborative improvement? What would that look like? Something to mull over until next time.
This is DigitView.